The caterer found me before my own family did. He pressed a tray of empty champagne glasses into my hands and asked me, very politely, to run them back through the swinging door to the kitchen, because someone had told him the woman at table 9 was with the staff. Table 9 sat against the wall by the kitchen door, wedged between the band's spare speaker and a stack of folded high chairs. My place card was on it, in my sister's looping gold hand. And there I stood, holding a stranger's dirty glasses at my little sister's wedding, the wedding I had paid for. I set the tray down on the linen very gently. I didn't say a word. What none of them knew, watching me carry those glasses like hired help, was that every plate in that hall, every white rose, every gold chair but the one they'd given me, had been bought with my money. You have to understand which sister I was. Every family with 2 daughters sorts them early, and ours had us sorted long before I was old enough to argue. My sister was the beautiful one. The fun one. The one things happened to. I was the reliable one, and in our house, reliable was never a compliment. It meant the daughter who would not need anything, so that everything could be spent on the daughter who did. For 9 years I had been the family's emergency fund with a heartbeat. When my mother's roof gave out, I paid for the roof. When my sister wrapped a car she couldn't afford around a guardrail, I quietly bought the replacement and let her tell everyone the insurance had come through. When my father's little business limped through 2 bad winters, I was the loan that kept the lights on, the loan no one wrote down, and no one ever mentioned again. Nobody thanked me for any of it. There is a particular loneliness in being the one a family leans on. You stop being a person and become a feature of the house. Nobody thanks the floor for holding them up. They notice it only the day it isn't there. I told myself it was love. For 9 years I called it love, because the alternative, that I was welcome exactly as long as I was useful and silent, was too cold to keep in the house. The wedding began the way all of it began. As a small favor, my sister wanted the venue with the ivy and the lake, the one that books a year and a half out and costs more than a down payment on a home. My mother called me about it. Not to ask, to tell me, warmly, that they'd found the perfect place, and wasn't it wonderful, and that the deposit happened to be due on Friday. In my family, a question and an instruction wore the same dress. You learned to tell them apart by who was expected to pay. So I paid the deposit. And then, the way these things go, I paid for the rest of it too. The gown that cost more than my first car. The florist, and then the better florist. The open bar my sister said would be embarrassing to leave closed. Each piece arrived as its own small emergency, always urgent, always already decided, always mine to cover. By the end I had paid for roughly 3/4 of a wedding that I was not, as it turned out, really a guest at. I know the number to the dollar, and I kept every receipt, quietly, in case someone one day looked me in the eye and told me I'd imagined it all. I never wanted a plaque. I didn't pay so anyone would stand up and name me. I paid because I could, and because in that family, saying no was a privilege reserved for the beautiful sister. The seating chart stood on a gold easel at the entrance, done in calligraphy I realized I had also, somewhere in the invoices, paid for. I ran my finger down it looking for my name. Not at the head table, where my sister glowed under the lights beside her new husband. Not at the family table just below it, where my parents sat with the aunts and my grandmother. My name was near the bottom. Table 9. By the kitchen. Seated with 2 vendors plus ones and an elderly neighbor who kept asking me when the real family would come by to say hello. Hurt is too small a word for it, and angry is the wrong one entirely. It felt like being handed a receipt for my own erasure. And it didn't stop at the chart. All night, they used me the way they always had. My mother caught my eye across the room, not to wave me over, but to mouth that the hall was too warm, could I find someone about it? An aunt asked me to sort out extra chairs for the late arrivals. The best man, certain I worked there, asked me where the gift table was. I handled all of it. Of course I did. I was the reliable one, and old training doesn't fall off you just because your heart is breaking by a swinging kitchen door. The worst part wasn't the strangers who mistook me for staff. It was my sister, who knew exactly what I was, and had seated me there anyway. Because you cannot have your perfect fairy tale day and a visible creditor at the head table at the same time. I was the one thing at that wedding too expensive to put on display. Then my father stood up to give the toast. He thanked everyone. He thanked both families for their extraordinary generosity in making this dream come true. He lifted his glass toward the groom's parents, who smiled and dipped their heads, and toward my mother, who pressed a hand to her chest as though she'd carried the whole thing up the hill on her back. The room applauded the people who had not paid for a single napkin. I sat at table 9 with my hands folded and I clapped too. Softly. I had gotten very good, over 9 years, at applauding for things I had done myself. And that would have been the whole story, the reliable sister, quietly robbed even of the thank you, if it hadn't been for the wedding planner. She was a brisk, kind woman who had dealt with exactly one person for 11 months. Me. Every contract, every signature, every card on file, every frantic Friday deposit, all of it carried my name, because all of it had been mine. She knew nothing about the family. She only knew who her client was. So when the cake was ready, she crossed that entire glowing room to table 9, crouched down beside me in front of the neighbor and the vendor's dates, and said, warmly, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, I just wanted to thank you. None of this happens without you. Would you look over the final total before we bring the cake out? And she laid the folder in my lap. The final invoice. My name at the top. The number I already knew by heart. The groom's mother, one table over, turned and watched me open it. An aunt watched. The neighbor who'd asked when the real family would arrive watched a stranger thank me like the answer to her question. I signed my name on the line, at the table by the kitchen, beside a tray of glasses somebody still expected me to carry back. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I only signed. But a signature, in the right light, is louder than any speech. My mother saw it happen. She saw the planner at the wrong table, saw the folder, saw the faces beginning to turn, and she came across the room fast, with a bright hostess smile stretched a size too wide. What's all this? She said, light as anything, reaching for the folder. Let me handle the boring paperwork, sweetheart. You enjoy yourself. And there it was, the whole machine, working right in front of me. Even now, caught, her first instinct was to take the paper out of my hands so the story could stay hers. I let a moment pass. I thought about everything I could have done with it. I could have stood on my chair. I could have asked my father, in front of 200 people, to remind the room whose extraordinary generosity he'd just toasted. I could have read the number aloud the way my mother read her instructions, warmly, so it sounded like a gift. I did none of it. And not because I was afraid. Because I finally understood the shape of the trap. A scene would have made me the story by morning, the jealous sister who ruined the wedding, the one who couldn't let them have a single day. Restraint left the truth sitting in the room with the people who had to keep living in it. You can seat someone by the kitchen. You can leave her name out of the toast. You cannot unsign the checks, and you cannot unsee which table the planner crossed the whole room to thank. I closed the folder and handed it back to the planner myself, not to my mother, and I said, quietly, it's all correct. That's the last one. The planner didn't know what I meant by that. My mother did. I paid the final balance that night. I want that on the record, because it matters to me. I finished what I'd started. I am not a woman who stiffs a florist to make a point at her own sister's wedding, but I did not stay for the cake. I found my own coat from the pile by the unattended coat check, and I walked out through the same swinging door they'd tried to send me through with the glasses. The kitchen was all steam and clatter and warm yellow light, and the staff nodded at me like one of their own, and for the first time all evening, being taken for the help didn't sting. They were the only people in that building who had said thank you. Out in the parking lot the night was cold and blue and completely quiet. I sat in my car for a while. I didn't cry. I did arithmetic. Because here is what I decided, alone in that lot with the music thumping faintly behind the walls. It was not revenge. Revenge is loud, and it costs you something. This was subtraction. For 9 years I had been an account the whole family drew on without once checking the balance. My mother's rent, topped up every month. My sister's car payment, the one the insurance never actually covered. The standing loan to my father that everyone had agreed to forget. All of it flowed out of me, quietly, automatically, in the dark. So on the drive home, at a red light, I turned all of it off. Not with a phone call. Not with a speech. I simply stopped. The auto payments, the top-ups, the quiet transfers I'd been making so long I'd stopped seeing them myself. I closed the tap the way you finally close a window you'd left open all winter, wondering, at last, why the house had always been so cold. Nobody noticed for 11 days. That is how invisible the floor stays until it's gone. Then the calls began, and not one of them was an apology. My mother called because her rent hadn't gone through and the landlord was asking questions. My sister called, tan from the honeymoon, because her car payment had bounced and there must be some mistake. My father called about the loan he had never once called a loan, until the month it stopped arriving. Every message was a version of the same 3 words. Not "I'm sorry." Not "we were wrong." Just, "what happened to the money?" As if the money were weather. As if it had never had a name, and a face, and a folded coat, and a seat by the kitchen. I didn't rage at them. I answered once, gently, with the truest thing I had. I told my mother that the woman they'd seated with the vendors had turned out to be the one vendor the family couldn't afford to lose. Then I stopped answering. They recalculated, in my absence, exactly what I had been worth, the one sum they'd never bothered to add up while I was still in the room. It turned out the daughter they had hidden by the kitchen door was the one holding the whole family up off the floor, with 2 quiet hands. You don't feel the weight of a thing like that until the day it sets itself down and walks out. My sister and I don't speak now. People assume that's the tragedy of the story. It isn't. The tragedy was the 9 years before, when we did. They gave me the worst seat in the room to prove I didn't matter. Then they spent the next month discovering I was the room. If you're the reliable one, the quiet wallet your family only calls when the card gets declined, tell me. What was the moment you finally stopped answering? I read every story here. The best ones become episodes.